This episode is brought to you by The Venture Project. Venture Project is a business incubator and co-working space in the fabulous Osh, Vegas, Wisconsin. However, we do remote consults. We also travel all over the country. So if you guys have a business idea or are interested in participating in the Venture Project community, please go to theventureprojectoshkosh.com, where you can learn more about me and the Venture Project itself. Once again, this is theventureprojectoshkosh.com.
Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews, the only show that's going to teach you how to be somebody.
Thank you again. Appreciate your time. We're going to talk about the story of Cypress Semiconductor called 0 to a Billion.
You're not going to make it. It's not like being a star quarterback.
You guys are all leaders. You guys are trying to crush it.
Ladies and gentlemen, whatever's going on in your life, you're going to run into that block.
Recognize that you're leaving 95% of American business completely behind.
You guys are here learning, getting education.
You're going to run into someone standing there.
No. Michael Jordan's humility is what we're talking about.
Saying to you, you're not good enough to get through to the other side. And I say to you, let's roll, baby. Let's roll.
All right, guys, welcome to Winners, Wallets, Worldviews. I'm your host, AJ Armstrong. Joining me, we got Ryan Goral coming to us from Boston today. So we're going to learn a little bit about Ryan, his story, and some lessons that you guys can take away. Ryan, welcome to the show, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So what's going on? What's new with you? We were talking a little bit before. You got a family, got some kids going, busy life, huh?
Yeah, it's 2 young boys, 6 and 18 months, keeping me on my toes. And, we're coming into the spring season here and getting ready for summer. So lots of planning and lots of fun.
Right on. Cool. Well, Ryan, give us a little background on kind of you and your life story and where your story really begins.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Denver. Just recently moved to the Boston area about a year ago. I've played sports my whole life. Basketball and baseball, and I was gifted enough to play Division I basketball at the University of Denver. That started me on this business quest, I guess, as a career. The Daniel School of Business there at the University of Denver, great business school, and I just fell in love with all the different components that going to making a successful business tick. And I graduated in 2004. I didn't quite know what to do. I spent so much time, playing basketball or in some sort of weight room or doing something. I didn't spend a lot of time career planning. And so it took me a little bit to, find a path and landed myself into the commercial banking industry. And it pretty much aligned with this curiosity I have with just learning about businesses, and banking allowed me to really understand the financial aspect, the credit aspect of these businesses. But in the banking industry, you also get to know the owners. You're spending a lot of time consulting them, advising them, and you just learn a ton about the challenges and opportunities that exist in the business world, and mostly small, lower middle market businesses. And then I went and got my MBA. I'm not one to talk about my MBA, but I went to this University of Colorado Boulder. And again, it was back to this curiosity. I didn't get an MBA or do this to say I had an MBA. I just wanted to learn more. And this was at the time something that presented that. So I completed that with a emphasis in entrepreneurship, because I knew there was, on top of business building, I really wanted to create business plans and think about creating stuff from scratch. So that was a pretty good, good learning experience for me. And coming out of school, I launched my first business in 2010. And it didn't make it. It was.
What was that business about?
It was the fancy term these days is a fundless sponsor. So I launched a business to go find businesses to buy. So I've been in and around this M&A private equity space really my whole career. Even in the banking industry, this was my focus, was lending into mergers, acquisitions, and et cetera. So I launched that business. Was looking for some blue collar, not sexy businesses that had a aging owner who just wanted to retire.
Kind of like Main Street style businesses or things like that.
Exactly. So I didn't find one to buy and went back into banking, and eventually, well, let's say I'm coming up on a year. This is round 2. Launched another firm last June, and I'm loving every minute of it.
Yeah, right on. Well, I know a lot of your experience is dealing with kind of M&A, the mergers and acquisitions side of businesses and small business, acquiring them, selling them, that kind of whole process. This is an area that I don't know a lot about, but I'm really fascinated with. And I think that's why this will be a really interesting discussion, because you think of, or at least on this show, when we talk about entrepreneurship or whatever, it's always somebody gets the light bulb and they go, put their pedal to the metal and really try to work on something. But there are so many ways of using business acumen to find opportunities out there that have already maybe been started, or the snowball's already kind of moving, where you can jump on. And likewise, starting a business with some kind of end goal in mind, or some kind of exit in mind. So this whole idea of acquiring businesses, doing mergers, or at some point when you're ready to kind of do what the classic entrepreneur does, is they start a business, they sell it, and then they go start another one and sell it. And that's eventually how they really kind of realize a lot of their gains. Let's focus on kind of the acquiring aspect of a business. Just break it down for us. Where do you start when you're starting to think about it? If I'm a person that either wants to buy it, like might want to buy a business, who are the people that this is right for, or the people you usually work with?
Yeah. I'll start with I put, buyers in really kind of 2 categories. My business serves mostly businesses that are current operations or current operating companies, and they're looking to execute a merger acquisition growth story, which is, buy a competitor, buy a supplier, grow through geographic expansion through an acquisition. And they already have an operating company that's a basis for that growth. And then I will selectively work with individuals who, whether they're coming out of corporate America and they want to, get their hands dirty and dive into owning a small business. There's a lot of, they actually, you said the word entrepreneurship. There's a big movement right now that's called entrepreneurship through acquisition, ETA. And some of these schools around the country are, starting to have classes and really teach individuals how to go buy a business and what how to go about it and what things to look for. So it's starting to become more and more popular. So if you're talking about an individual, really where I start is just like anything else. You kind of start with the question why. Small business ownership is hard. It's not glamorous, and it's a lot of stress. So determining, if the individual is built and doing it for the right reasons, that's usually where I start. If it's just they want to be able to say they bought a business, or if they're just doing it to buy a job, there's other ways to go about making money in this world. So once I kind of understand that there's a why around it, this goes into the lower middle market companies that are acquisitive too. It's don't just go buy stuff. Don't just go buy companies. Let's put a strategy and a vision and a why around it. Because it's work, it's risk, and let's make sure we have the right foundation of the why before we go execute.
Yeah.
So with the, if you were talking about individuals, the other thing that's really, because on the corporate side, you kind of have a business, let's say it's an HVAC company, but you kind of already have a core value proposition that you've perfected over the years. the individual, the next step is really kind of pairing what is your expertise, and that can be industry, that can be specific, whether you're sales and marketing minded person or you're a data and ops minded person. Trying to figure out kind of where your lane is, because as you go out into the world of finding an acquisition target, there's a lot of options out there, and you could spend a lot of time looking at a lot of different deals. And if you don't have the lens of, hey, I'm a sales and marketing guy and I want to go buy a business, and this business hasn't done sales and marketing, and there's an ops person there to help me on the data and the operation side, that deal is going to look a lot more attractive than another business that may have done a good job on the sales and marketing side already, and maybe has weaknesses on the operation side. And that if that's not your lane, I would recommend you stay away from that. So
how does that work if you're wanting to, so someone, a company, for example, a small company is wanting to grow and they want to acquire a new business. They're looking at kind of their core competencies. Let's take this HVAC company.
Yep.
They say we're doing, air conditioning, cooling units and residential commercial spaces or whatever. And they're looking to acquire. Now, you brushed over these really quickly at the beginning. There's several reasons they might want to do this. They might want to buy a competitor, you said. They might want to expand their geography. What were some other reasons that you mentioned of like a strategy of why this would make sense?
Yeah. So there's, you buying up market share, which is the going out and buying a competitor strategy. There's the synergies of buying a supplier. So instead of
go deeper versus going wider, right?
You got it. So buying a supplier is another strategy. If you want to grow geographically, buying another company that does what you do well in another geography, sometimes makes some sense. And the other thing that I'm seeing, especially in the contractor trade industry, is the labor constraints are so real. So these businesses have all the business and revenue opportunities in front of them. They lack the people and labor to do the work.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing some companies out there going out and they're buying competitors or very like-minded or like-typed companies for labor purposes, so they can expand their labor pool. So that could be another reason of growing through an acquisition is, acquiring the technology or the people
sure.
That you may not have access to.
So that I think that's really, helpful to kind of like narrow in, what the strategy might be. And you also mentioned kind of staying within a lane, like kind of staying within these core competencies of your existing business in this example. At what point does it make sense to try to buy a core competency, or should you not try to do that? If that makes sense.
I think that if you're already a business in the HVAC space, let's keep using that as an example. There's a lot of questions that go into that. To me, you want to stay in the HVAC related space. That's your core competency. Now, where I will advise, or I will see, is buying something that's adjacent. So if your customer, I don't know if this is a good example or not, but let's say there's something else that this HVAC company can sell to their end customer, whether it's residential, whether it's plumbing or electrical. Yeah, do you buy a competency there so you can have more service and product offerings to your end customer? Absolutely. That's a very valid strategy. I always try to narrow it to, you're expanding services and products versus, just wanting to go buy a bunch of disparate companies and doing more of a hold co or private equity. That's definitely a different, it's definitely a strategy if you have the competencies of being a capital allocator.
Right.
People are building holdcos and buying companies that are in all kinds of different industries. It's just a different game than developing and executing on a growth M&A growth strategy from a corporate development or a growth strategy versus building kind of a conglomerate private equity firm.
Right. So like the HVAC company wouldn't go buy a videography company or something like that, but another trade that might have some type of applicable skill sets that you can use, employees or more training or something that's generally related. What
Yeah.
I'm visualizing is kind of an overlap, right? There's going
Yeah.
to be something that we do already that this company does, but there's also we're buying maybe a new capability that can add on to our existing services we offer.
Absolutely. And you see that in the commercial space a lot too. These contractors are serving property owners, and they're the go-to HVAC supplier or service provider. Well, that real estate owner is also spending money on other trades. So you have one relationship, and if you can go acquire other services, you can leverage that relationship and hopefully grow your wallet share, if you want to use that term, with that one owner or each customer. That's definitely a way to do it.
Yeah, I really like what we kind of talked about as far as, are we buying something to go deeper, kind of more vertical, of buying suppliers or buying some labor that you use all the time? Or are you trying to buy something wider, maybe competition or buy market share? That's a really, I think, simple way to look at it, in addition to some other strategies that I think you outlined. So that's kind of looking at a small business or an existing business and what some strategies might look at. And then you talked about this entrepreneurship through acquisition, which is very interesting to me because, you don't think of that all the time as an entrepreneur. You think you need to have the light bulb go off and you come up with the idea, but there could be something that's already working out there and you could buy something and make it better. Tell me a little bit about that strategy.
Yeah. So it's, I don't know the origin. I think there's a professor who kind of coined that term. I could be completely wrong, but this entrepreneurship through acquisition is that you outlined it really well. You don't have to just come up with an idea and start from scratch to be an entrepreneur. You can find a operating business that's doing fine, but maybe has a ton of opportunity for growth, whether you see this a lot with some of these older, I guess call them established businesses that have been around for a long time, being run by maybe a patriarch who started it 40 years ago, and they've made a lot of money over the years. And as the owner's gotten comfortable, and their risk profile changes as they get older, so their desire or their appetite to go grow through an acquisition or go expand a new product or service isn't there. So these businesses get to a place where there's a ton of innovation that could happen, whether it's technology improvements, operational efficiencies, definitely a growth around, different products and services. But these businesses are sitting there making decent money for the owner. They're doing really well, but there's just so much unlocked potential. So when they talk about this entrepreneurship through acquisition, it's taking that entrepreneur lens to this operating business and going, wow, there's so much innovation that we can deploy into this old kind of just sleepy company to take it to the next level. And taking it to the next level is that entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of examples I can think of where this works, right? Where I call them kind of the Main Street style businesses, right? You probably drive past them. It's probably been let's say a family retail shop for years, and the family is run by the owners and whatever, and they've aged over the time, but they still have maybe piles of paperwork and storage in the back that they run everything through. And, someone younger could come in and say, hey, we could automate all this and, increase efficiency by X, Y, and Z. And it just seems like it's the right fit for someone who's kind of, old dog, isn't going to learn a new trick. We're ready to sell the business anyway. And it just seems like there's a lot of opportunity there. I can think of a lot of different examples like that probably are right underneath your nose. You don't even realize it. And I think that's a really interesting strategy. Now, when, I talk to entrepreneurs in our incubator and other things, they seem to always have like money problems, right? They always start out broke. We're always working with broke people, which is great because, you got to start somewhere. But how do you how would you go about finding one of these companies, and then how do you go about trying to buy it with your money? How do you finance these types of things? How would you go about even trying to get one?
Yeah, so there's the search component. We'll start there. So how do you go find one? There's marketplaces out there that list available companies that are ready to sell. They've already had a broker engaged. The broker puts together a quick outline on what the business is, and then they post it on these marketplaces. Biz Buy Sell is a huge one.
Yep.
And there's a bunch of new ones popping up that are really innovative. They're industry specific.
I'll link Biz Buy Sell too in our show notes, so people can glance through if they do want to buy something and see what's in their area.
Yeah, it's those are the deals and the companies that are ready and they're listed for sale. So that's one place to start. The other place that's gets a little bit I'd call it maybe more quality of leads, because a broker goes out there and they talk to those Main Street companies you're talking about, and they go, "Are you ready to sell? Oh, you are ready to sell. Okay, I'll list you." And then the broker spends some time getting the package together to take it to Biz Buy Sell. Well, before it goes to Biz Buy Sell, these brokers all, they have a buyer pool the people that they know, that maybe they know there's somebody that is already well qualified to buy a HVAC company or a flooring company or whatever it is. So I feel like the stuff that gets to the end of the Biz Buy Sell might have already had some looks. So building relationships with brokers to see if you can get it before it goes full market.
Get the deal on the front end, kind of.
Not a bad idea. It's a little tricky. These brokers are supposed to be fiduciary and supposed to take it to market, and however they see that serving their client. But there's relationships that you can build in the broker world and the investment banking world to get looks at opportunities as a buyer. And then there's the last piece, which is what proprietary search, which is these companies aren't listed for sale. This is it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If maybe you come from a corporate background that was in the solar space, let's say, and you want to go buy a small solar company because you have industry contacts, you plug into that situation really well, and you want to go buy a solar company. Well, you probably won't find a bunch of solar companies on these Biz Buy Sell or these other marketplaces. So you're gonna have to pick up the phone and call them. It's a cold call. It's hey, my name is Brian. I'm interested in buying solar companies. Came across yours. Love to talk if you're interested in thinking about selling. So it's trying to buy these companies before they go to market.
Sure.
So those are kind of how I think about the various stages of where you find the search. And then the financing side is it's a pretty mixed bag. Most of these smaller businesses are financed through an SBA loan. SBA has it's kind of the only game in town to entrepreneurs who might, to your point, be a little bit cash strapped. They provide more leverage than you would typically be able to get in a conventional loan setting, upwards of 80-90% of the transaction. So that makes these things a lot more doable for entrepreneurs or even small businesses who are looking to do an acquisition. The loan limit for SBA is $5 million. So you're really talking about, call it transaction size of $10 million and less, where SBA could be could have a place, which is a pretty big subsector of these types of acquisitions. So the SBA is used quite a bit for these, for financing these acquisitions.
Sure. I imagine there's other possibilities where you could use the owner to finance part of the, a portion of the revenue streams over a period of time. There's some risk in that for them, though, if you run it into the ground, obviously. But that's really interesting. Where's a good way to start networking with brokers or finding brokers? How do you do that? how do you find where business brokers live and hang out?
Yeah, I think that there are some business broker associations, and I think each market, I believe they are in each market. So if you're in Denver, I know that there was a broker association that, gathers brokers at annual events and what have you. But I think, a quick Google search, if you spend enough time on these marketplaces, you'll see the brokers who are listing these companies. And there's quite a few brokers out there. It's a business that, I'd say it's, low barriers of entry. You have to go get at least in Denver, you have to have a real estate license. So there's that hurdle that, your brokers have at least done that. But I think, an easy Google search, I bet you these broker associations have lists of their members, and then spending time on these marketplaces, you probably could round out most of the brokers through that avenue.
Sure. Right on. Okay. Well, I think that it paints a nice picture on kind of the acquisition side of at least a good, nice overview of what some possibilities are with it. Now, the other, situation that we run into as business owners and entrepreneurs is getting out and exiting. What are some of your thoughts kind of on that process?
Yeah. So I've spent plenty of time, most of my focus has been on the buy side. So that's really kind of where my expertise is. With that being said, a lot of my work today is starting to grow in kind of this prep to sell market, especially with my clients. So my clients may be going out and executing a growth strategy that involves buying another business as a part of a prep to sell situation. So I'm getting more and more involved in positioning and consulting around prep to sell. So I'd say it's super new, but how deep I'm diving is new for me. But I've been in and around the M&A industry for so long that the prep to sell is, I couldn't emphasize it more for these businesses who want to maximize their transactions value. You see it all the time. Let's put them in two buckets. Bucket one is, I'm tired of this business, I want to sell. They contact a broker and the broker works to sell it 90 days later. And they haven't done, some certain things that could add, enterprise value to the business.
Yeah.
Bucket B is, I want to sell in 3 years. And a lot of the work I'll do is I'll come in and bring a buyer's lens to their business and say, if I was a buyer, I'd be looking at these, 5 big things that I see as problematic or increase my risk to the transaction. And why don't we go spend the next 3 years, putting those fires out or putting some enforcement around them. And those are common things like customer concentration risk. If a business has, 30-40% of their business with one customer, a buyer is going to go, oof, that presents quite a bit of risk for me. Too much reliance on the owner, which you see a lot of. The owner has all the operating manuals in their head, where all the relationships with the customers or the business, if they were removed, wouldn't function. And a buyer would, that would be a risk factor for a buyer. So there's things that a business should do if they have luxury of time and say, hey, I can wait 2 to 3 years and really get this thing to a place where a buyer looks at it and goes, this thing is, there's no customer concentration risk. You've removed yourself from the operation. You've got a key man person in there running it who's going to stay on with the business going forward. Things like that can make the transaction go smoother, and you probably are going to get more money for the business if it's put together that way.
So, okay, that's really interesting because you're looking at it kind of on both sides of if you're looking through a buyer's lens, you're also looking for how you can increase the value of this company. So let's talk about it as a buyer quickly. What am I looking for? What are the blind spots? How am I going to start doing some penciling out some valuations of this company? And you mentioned a couple different risks. One is like, two centered around the owner. The other one's too central with customer base, some other issues. But then like, how am I going to value this? How do I know if the broker and the seller are just blowing smoke? Without doing a full class on, I guess, business valuations, I mean, what are some numbers and some ways we can kind of take a look at it?
Yeah, this is a topic I can go on forever about. So you have to stop me because it is a very complicated. It doesn't need to be, but it's nuanced, and I love the topic. But as a start, one thing to think about with regard to valuation is the first thing you look at is the cash flow of the business. What is the business historically speaking? How much cash flow is it created?
How far back are you looking at? Like,
it goes into the next important factor, which is a valuation is typically driven by how financeable, if that's not really a word,
sure.
But how financeable the thing is. So the bank's going to look at 2-3 years of historical cash flow and say, okay, you want to buy it for $1 million, let's say. Does the business produce enough cash flow to support the debt of, call it $750,000 or $800,000? Does this business has this business historically been able to support that much debt? Is one way to think about, because when you think about financing, if these deals are mostly being used by SBA, then you can kind of figure out how much leverage, call it 80-90% sometimes, the leverage are being applied to these smaller businesses, which will start dictating marketability. And the brokers know the SBA very well. Most of them do. So they know if they're doing their kind of their assessment appropriately, they're looking at, okay, here's the average of the cash flow of this business the last 3 years, assuming 80 or 90% leverage, this business, we should list it at X. So the debt kind of drives the valuation. So that is step one. But to me, the value of the business is really about what you can do with the business going forward. So from to get really nerdy around valuation, the business is only worth what the future cash flows will present.
Yeah.
So it's a projection exercise. Well, banks aren't lending into projections. So you can see how there's kind of two different things. There's what's financeable today. And then there's what's the value of this business based on what I can uniquely bring to this business and add value and generate additional cash flow, discounted back to today in some discounted cash flow process.
Yep.
And if there's any delta, so this is the last piece, is if there's a big delta between how much can be financed today that drives the initial list price, it's got to be plugged with equity. So let's say the bank says, hey, we can't do any more than $700,000. But this seller is saying, oh, well, my pipeline, or I've got all these deals coming down the works that are going to, double this business going forward, or something to that effect. Or the buyer says, I have enough contacts where this business will be double going forward. That delta between the bank and what that buyer ends up buying has to be made up of some creative combination of equity, the seller rolling, whether they're financing it through a seller carry debt or an earnout, some common, or there's mezz lenders out there that might be able to take on additional risk. There's things to plug that delta if there is one. And
so you're saying if the delta is on the downside, where the cash flows might be less than what the bank wants to see, you have to be able to prove to the bank or whoever your financier is what value we're bringing in excess of this deal.
It's more of a factor of the bank's gonna be limited on what they're willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's step one. And then step two is, what does the broker and the seller believe the thing is worth? And, this, sometimes you can never get there. Maybe the business owner or the seller thinks, and this is oftentimes the case, they think their business is worth twice as much as what is actually what a buyer could actually get financing for. And then you have to do the work to figure out, is there value between what they're wanting to list it at and what the historical cash flow presents? And the only thing that would ever make sense is somehow the cash flow would have to substantially improve going forward. And because the banks won't lend into the projections, you have to make up the difference between what the bank's willing to do and the purchase price if it's excessive with additional equity. So you're either bringing more equity to the table.
Yeah.
The seller is carrying on a little bit more risk because they're the one telling you that there's this big pipeline of jobs or work coming down the pike. You see it quite often. So from a buyer's perspective and from a valuation perspective, there's really two games being done. What can you get financing for, and what's your access to capital? And then what can you do with the business going forward? And those are the big muscle movements when it comes to valuation.
Interesting. Okay. So obviously, if you're feeling that you can bring something to the business that puts it far in excess of what the bank is kind of willing to loan on, and let's say the bank and the seller are kind of in lockstep, they think it's reasonably similar, then that's a good indicator that you could probably buy.
Yeah, you're probably bringing some additional equity to the table. You're basically betting on yourself that you're going to be able to hit those additional cash flow metrics that you're outlining. But yeah, it goes back to that earlier why. If you're buying a business because you just want to replace your salary and there's no growth and there's no innovation and there's no enhancement to cash flow, that people do it all the time and it's fine. But if you're really thinking about it as an entrepreneur, you really want to grow something special, then there is a big time exercise on what can you do with the business going forward, enhancing the revenue and enhancing the cash flow. That is part of what the business is going to be worth to that specific buyer today.
So, okay. So this is kind of based on historical cash flow, projected cash flow. What if there, are assets within the business? How do you kind of factor those in, or do you factor them in? Let's say the HVAC company has a fleet of trucks or something, or they hold a lot of air conditioning units on inventory and they have a building, all these types of things, right?
Yep. So there's a couple ways to think about it, but simply the assets generate the cash flow. So it's all about the cash flow should tell the story. Now, the assets come into the mix when the bank is trying to figure out what their collateral is for the loan. SBA was created, and this is why this M&A, small business M&A, this lending avenue is opened up for entrepreneurs and sellers of businesses. Is the SBA they determine that there's an opportunity to serve, that's their serving, government arm, to offer this loan program. A lot of times these transactions don't have collateral. So when you go buy, let's say for sake of easy math, let's say the HVAC company is generating $300,000 of cash flow, and a typical multiple, let's just say it's a 3 to 4 times multiple on that cash flow to drive value. So let's say it's $1 million is the purchase price of the business. Well, that $1 million is based on cash flow, not assets. The assets generate the cash flow. And when the bank looks at the asset list of trucks and fleet and equipment, usually it's all depreciated. And there's not a ton and banks don't put a ton of value on trucks and fleet. So the bank will consider it undersecured. So the $800,000 loan that they would do, maybe the net book value of the trucks and the fleet would be $200,000-$300,000. Let's just say. So there's an undersecured nature, and banks hate that. But SBA comes in and says, whoa, this is friendly for the small business community. So we're going to allow this transaction to occur. The bank, you can feel comfortable taking on that airball is what they call it, between the 800 and the 300, that the $500,000 gap of collateral value. The SBA says, we'll guarantee this loan. If it goes bad, we'll write a check to the bank on 75% of the loss. So it's an insurance policy, if you will, for banks to take on that additional risk. And that's where those types of assets are considered more on the banking side. And then the real estate, it's a whole other avenue, but it's real estate typically is a non-operating asset. So usually they're stripped out of the business value. So you're buying the business for X. And then if you want to buy the building that's associated with the business, it's a separate transaction. And the SBA actually has owner-occupied real estate lending options for those too. So you can pull them together and buy both. If you're a person or a company looking to buy another business, you can look at the real estate as well. But it's typically separate.
Yeah, very interesting. If you're trying to go through an SBA loan, do you just reach out to your local lenders to work through a SBA process, or is there endorsements on the SBA website themselves? How do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, I come from the commercial financing industry, so I'm a little skewed in my recommendations. I'll put a disclaimer there. I feel like a lot of the good SBA lenders will be found in a couple different avenues. One, your local community bank who is there to support the community, depending on the size of the deal. They have the market knowledge to really kind of show their strength, which is service and understanding of the business community and being a fixture of the community. They're in a decent spot to put an SBA loan in place for a buyer. There's other banks out there who are highly specialized in SBA lending that are national brands. They're really good at what they do. And they're not always in the communities that you're looking to buy. So it does come down to a certain extent a personal preference of the buyer on what they want out of a banking partner. If they want just a deal closed and they want that SBA expertise, they can work with a bigger national lender who does a ton of volume. Or if they really care about that community bank, they can go to their community bank. You can do some research. Some don't have SBA loan programs or don't do a ton of them. I would always recommend going to a community bank that does a lot of them, and it's something that they like to do. That process tends to be a little simpler and a little easier on the buyer. But yeah, I would start with that community bank, and then there's other options from there.
Right on. Okay. Well, tell me a little bit more about, I guess, where you fit into all this. Like, what does your company do, and how that works with small businesses as well?
Yeah. So G-Spire Group is a company I founded about a year ago. It was about 4 years in the making, at least in my head. I saw consistently in my roles, a real need for the small / lower middle market, which I classify as, let's say you're doing anywhere from 7-8 million revenue up to 50 million revenue, and you're doing 1 million to 5 in cash flow is just roughly that small / lower middle market space. And these businesses are often overlooked by advisors. They're kind of too small for the sophisticated advisors to, they're kind of working with bigger clients. So they have all these really nice businesses that are being overlooked, consultants, CPAs, advisors. So I saw this, and then I said, well, what if this company want to go grow through an acquisition, which is what I was helping finance a lot of the time. And there's no one helping them. There's no resources. And these owner operators, there's two things that they're typically, two characteristics that typically make up a good owner operator. They're 100% entrenched in operations every day, and they're very busy. So they lack capacity to actually go out and do all the work that's necessary to grow through an acquisition. And then they typically haven't done a substantial transaction in the past. So the M&A expertise is not there. So I said, well, someone should come in there and help them provide that extra capacity so they can grow through acquisitions, because it'd be really hard for them to do it as an owner operator. And that was the genesis of G-Spire Group, is launching a firm that comes in and how I talk about it is it's a fractional corporate development executive service. And corporate development is just the word that big companies use for their functions of, like Pepsi will have a corporate development division, and their sole purpose is helping them put together the strategy, outreach, due diligence, and integration on acquisitions that they make. So I'm taking that concept and saying, well, I think we can do this on a fractional basis for these smaller, lower middle market companies and help them grow from, call it a 3, 5, 750 of cash flow or $1 million, and get them to that 2, 3, 4. And bring in some capacity and bring in some horsepower to their leadership team to help them actually go do that, is what G-Spire Group is all about.
How do you get paid? Are you on like a fee? Or are you on like a cut of the exit, or how does that look?
Yeah, so it's just a monthly consulting fee.
Okay.
And I break it up into engagement time periods. Usually it's 6 to 9 months is where I start, and then we can do renewals. As a fractional corporate development executive, it's important that business owners, and this is a kind of a new space, so this is kind of the entrepreneurial piece of my business, is I'm not transactional, I'm not a broker, and I'm not a banker. I'm not out there just going finding deals, and that's my sole purpose. As a fractional executive, I'm part of your team. So we're developing the strategy, we're flushing out the strategy together. I'm doing the search on behalf of your organization. I'm quarterbacking due diligence. I'm helping with the capital discussions, and then I'm actually helping on the integration side. So it's A to Z, helping these companies do this work. And I say all that because it's common in my industry to charge a success-based fee on a transaction. And I made a decision that I didn't want to do that. If I'm going to be quarterbacking a due diligence process and pushing to grow through an acquisition, I don't want to be compensated on the actual acquisition. I want to be making sure we're doing the right thing by the client. And really where my incentives line with theirs is, as we do acquire companies, there's additional work to be done on the integration side. So my retainer will it'll just ratchet up for the integration work, and we keep going. And that's how I have structured the comp piece.
Sure. So as the executive in the company, the owner operator would probably be looking at this as kind of like an investment towards growth through acquisitions. It's going to be more of not necessarily a planned exit or anything like that, but that investing into a service like this will eventually show multiple returns based on the profitability of whatever we find.
That's right. That's right.
That makes sense. Well, cool, man. Well, where can people reach out to you? Where can they get a hold of you? How do they find you?
Yeah. So I got a website that's gspiregroup.com. My email, Ryan@gspiregroup.com. All my information is on my website. It's pretty easy to get at me. I want to be accessible. And, pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn are my two kind of social avenues. And I'm just gearing up a newsletter that can be signed up on my website for all things buy-side M&A, corporate development. I'm doing some case studies to show real life. Here's how this company grew through an acquisition. Here's the things they learned. So just bringing some case study live examples to my community. That can all be done through my newsletter and my website.
Right on. Any final tips or pieces of advice that you want to give our listeners, whether they're seasoned entrepreneurs that have already arrived at multiple levels or people just looking to get into it?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that, my passion in what I do is all about growth. And One thing that I see all the time is growth for growth's sake is not necessarily good. But I do have this as an athlete, you can appreciate, is that concept that you're either growing or you're dying.
Yeah.
And if you're not getting bigger and better, someone else is. That's just ingrained in me. What I've learned over the years, though, is I think that's really important. You always have to be growing and getting better, but that doesn't always mean revenue. There's other places within your business that you can be growing and developing and getting stronger. And maybe revenue is part of that equation, depending on where your business is in a certain life cycle. But I think that I'm just here to inspire growth because there's so much opportunity out there. Growth is fun, it's challenging, but these businesses, there's a lot of benefits and opportunity out there to be, take them to the next level, and it's so much fun. So that's my parting shot.
Ryan, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. You guys are listening to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews podcast. You can find out more about Ryan at gspiregroup.com. And if you have any comments, questions, leave them in the comments section. Leave us a review, and we'll make sure to put these links in the show notes. Thanks again, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.